If you're a songwriter, but you find that every time you finish a song, it kind of sounds the same. You're using the same techniques, the same methods, and the same gear you've been using for a long time. Well, then this is the podcast for you, my friend, because we're going to cover 10 tips to make your songs a little more spicy in 2025. Hello, my name is Pete Johns. This is the Studio Live Today podcast. My goal around here is to help you create, record, and release your best music. We do that through tips and tricks and tutorials and live shows and this weekly podcast where we usually try to give you something to think outside the box a little bit. And that's what these 10 ideas are going to be. Some of them you may use right now. Some of them you may never have used. And some maybe you used in the past and you're like, oh yeah, I used to do that. Maybe I'll try it again. So hopefully out of these 10, there's a little aha moment there that gives you an idea that means you can go back and add it to the song that you're working on now or your next song. Let's dive in and start with number one. This is doubling or tripling your vocal. Now, this is a very simple and a very common technique, but it is the absolute secret sauce of getting full sounding vocals. If you're finding that in your songs, your vocals are a little light, a little thin, a little clean, and let's be honest, in the digital world, that's quite common. We don't have that nice analog warmth to add a little bit of sort of thickness to your vocals. So if you're finding your vocals are a little thin, especially in choruses, doubling and tripling your vocals is really good in choruses. Now, what is doubling a vocal for those that don't know? It is exactly what it sounds like. It is recording the exact same vocal, but doing it twice. Now, when you're starting out, a lot of folks say to me, can't I just copy the original vocal? Well, no, because the way recording works and the way that that will actually work in your project is just going to double the volume. The thickness and the interest comes in to make it spicy. You need to have that slight variation. Now, a good singer, someone like a Freddie Mercury or a John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Kurt Cobain, you can argue if they're good, bad, or otherwise, but they doubled and tripled vocals really well because they were close but not exact. And that's the key to a good double, is that you re-record your whole vocal take. Now, the cool thing is with doubling and tripling, you don't always have to sit down and do it again. Because if you've taken my advice and when you're recording a lead vocal, you maybe do 3, 4, or 5 takes, you can use those additional takes as your double. Now, am I saying your double doesn't have to be as good as your lead vocal? Not really, but kinda. So quite often I will actually use that as a double or a triple. Now, your double vocal doesn't need to sit at the same exact volume as your first vocal, then it will overload. But what you can do is with your doubled and your tripled vocal is just have them down at usually around a fifth to a quarter the volume of the original vocal. And that way it'll thicken it up, but it still kind of hides it away a little bit. It's not going to sound like two people singing. It's going to sound like one person singing, but it's going to thicken up that sound. Now, you can do funky things like change up the processing. So you can EQ your doubled vocal to maybe pull out some of the bass so you're not building up the bass too much. You can pan your vocal so you can put your doubled or your tripled vocals one to the left and one to the right. That can create a really nice wide stereo scope as well for your doubles and your triples. And again, you can even change up the effects. You can put less or more reverb or delay on your double than you do on your original vocal. A lot of folks just leave their double and triples quite static, like without a whole lot in the way of reverb and delay. They'll just make it a very kind of dry sound, and then they'll add the spiciness and the effects to their main lead vocal. So doubling or tripling or quadrupling or quintupling or octuple. I don't look. There's people that go nuts with this stuff. There's producers that layer up 12 vocals and just create this amazingly thick sound. So something to try out. Related to that is number 2, which is to do a second vocal an octave above or an octave below. Now, this is similar. This is the same concept as a double, but if you're doing it as an octave, it can really create some good sounds. So if, especially again in choruses, if you're singing your song, it's like, I heard a little voice inside my head, but now I'm sober. You could just go, I heard a little voice inside my head, but now I'm so you record that at a low volume, then you're like, I heard a little voice inside my head, but now I'm sober. And the quality doesn't always have to be amazing because it's almost like an accent of it. And it works really well. I tend to find that doing the low down one, the octave down, especially in like folk music and sometimes in rock music, it can really add to that. And if you've got a different vocalist, that can be even cooler. So if you've got someone else that can sing on your tracks, or you've got another vocalist as part of your band, get them to do the octave up or the octave down, and then mix that into your lead vocal, and it can really add a little bit of spice to your overall mixes. Number 3, bridges and middle eights. Now, I don't know what happened, but something happened to music about 20 years ago, and bridges and middle eights, so those sections in the middle of a song where it goes different. It might change key, it might change chord structure, it might change speed. These are all things that can really make your song super spicy, because if it's just verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, final chorus, gets a little dull, doesn't it? And a lot of music these days, the overall length of songs has become shorter, and that is because they'll just dive in. It'll be verse. They'll hit the hook within 30 seconds, like they tell you to do, and then it's chorus, and then it's another verse, and then it's a slightly more amped chorus, another verse, and a big final chorus. And look, that's fine. That works sometimes, but think of some of the best songs. I think of bands like Radiohead that just have awesome middle eights and bridges that just change things up and give you a very different perspective. The band Muse is another one. Tool have some amazing change ups and bridges. They don't have songs that don't have bridges. They have multiple bridges. They're like bloody Madison County, Tool. That's a really weird and unusual reference. So think about adding bridges. And bridges, it can be as simple as just dropping it down, just doing a cool thing where it's just the bass and the drums for a bit, or changing the key, or changing the tones that you're using. If you've got lots of really heavy stuff, maybe go light. Maybe use some dynamics, some build up. Do like a chung 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 chung, and build back up through that middle eight. Think of songs like One Baby, Two, and I'm trying not to get copyright claims, so I shouldn't do this. But think about like In Bloom from Nirvana, where they have that bit in the middle where it's just like the build, and then it drops back in with a big scream. So things like that can actually really help build and spice up your song. Speaking of key changes, number 4, how about key changes? Key changes used to be in so many songs. If you listen to 70s and 80s music, there is very rarely a song that doesn't have some sort of key change. The classic one is you're getting towards the end of the song and you get that semitone or tone up at the end. And I won't try and sing songs, I'm already in danger of copyright here. But they'll go up at the end to really hammer home that final chorus. So they'll go from a D up to an E, and you're going up that whole tone. Or sometimes it can go down, or sometimes it can change completely to a different key. And look, I know I said key changes, time signature changes can also work. Speed changes can also work. Getting that differentiation going on, that's the key. In my opinion, that's the key. Music, especially when you've been doing it for a while and you've got your own sort of technique and strategy around music, you tend to find that you do things in very similar keys, you do things at very similar tempos, and you've probably got a time signature that you love as well. Many of us gravitate towards 4/4, or with the occasional 6/8 or 3/4 thrown in for a bit of variety. But what's wrong with 7/8? What about a 5/4 track? Why not try something different? So key changes and, by extension, time signature changes as well are very cool. Number 5, pads. Now, having pads in your songs, especially for those that are rock singers or folk singers or acoustic or singer-songwriters, you might be thinking, no, no, no. We want to replicate a band sound. We want to just have guitar, bass, singer, drums. And that's cool. For a live version of a song, that's cool. But you'd be very surprised if you listen to bands that you think are very much, guitar-driven bands or even instrument-driven bands in general, when you listen to their recorded versions of their songs, they have a lot of pads in them. So pads can be string sounds, it can be piano sounds, it can be synth sounds, organ sounds, whatever you like. And all a pad is doing is literally what it sounds like. It's padding out the mix. So if you're creating songs and you're finding that your mixes sound a little disconnected, so you say you got guitar left, guitar right, your classic mix, guitar left, guitar right, bass and drums down the middle, lead vocal, maybe some backing vocals off to the sides as well. And maybe you got an acoustic guitar up the middle as well in like a rock song. And you're finding that it's not gluing together. It's the parts are there, but they're not gluing together. Organ. There's a reason why so many rock bands back in the 60s and 70s and 80s started using Hammond B3 and started using organ sounds, is it really does bring all that together. Because you got that range of frequencies you can use with an organ sound, it can really think of the band Crowded House from Australian and New Zealand friends. They use the organ and they just have pads on the organ in the background to perfection. And then sometimes, yes, the organ comes up and becomes the main instrument. Strings are another classic one. Classical and classic. So just having like a nice cello sound below. Like think of bands like Coldplay and Travis and again Radiohead. Think of the bands that you can think of that use pads. It's almost all of them. The Killers have killer pads. Yes, I went there. Even if you listen to some old school rock like Bruce Springsteen, yeah, he's usually got a keyboard player there with some piano behind it, or some organ, or some Rhodes, or something that just sort of glues your mix together. So don't don't be so stubborn like I have been in the past and say a rock song's not a real rock song if it's got pads in it. Yeah. No, it can. Add your pads. You'll thank me. Related to pads is number 6, which is arpeggios. These can sound awesome. So this is an arpeggio is simply a collection of notes, usually in the chord of the key that you're playing in. So do 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 do. Think of that. Think of like that song, "The Entertainer." Is that the one? Um, the kings, in my opinion, of using arpeggios and arpeggiated sounds is Muse. So listen to some Muse songs. Placebo is another band that use arps and pads and things really, really well. And it can be very simple and very subtle. So it doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to be like a massive, big 4-octave arpeggio like Muse often use. It can literally just be like, think about that, or octaves, just sitting behind it. Think about a song like Girls and Boys by Blur. Go listen to that, like yeah, you just got that nice sort of arpeggio, but it's really just 2 notes. It's the 2 key notes. So arpeggios don't need to be complex. They don't even need to be there for the whole song, and they don't need to be like a main instrument standing out the front. But this is what you're finding to spice up a song. People think, yeah, let's just throw some trumpets on there. Let's just throw some saxophone on there. You can do that. That's the obvious way to spice something up. But there's so many cool ways that you can just use some of these subtle techniques to make your song sound a little spicier. Next up, panning your effects. Yeah. So a lot of people are especially folks that come from like the garage band school of creating, we're fairly linear with our effects, mostly because GarageBand on your iPad or your iPhone only has the ability to add inline effects. So without the ability to have proper effect sends and receives and effect buses, which means you separately control your effects and then you send bits of your tracks to the effects and then bring it back in, it can be really easy to get into the habit of just putting on very linear effects. By that I mean, you got your vocal, you just add your effect straight to that vocal and you don't change it. You don't change the panning of it. You don't change the sound or the EQ of it. That can be a bit of a trap because sometimes you don't want your effects to sound just like the original sound. You want the effect to be different. So your reverb, you may only want the reverb applied to the top end. So you may not want your real low parts. So you're playing a guitar. You don't want the reverb of the low end. Sometimes you may only want the top end. And that's where we're doing something now. In GarageBand, it's a little trickier. What you have to actually do is copy and duplicate your first track to another track, add a plugin, turn it to 100% wet, 0% dry, and then tweak your effect there. It means that you can have your original dry instrument track and then a just effects track as a separate track. And then you can dial that in. You can change the EQ, you can change the panning, you can change whatever you want of that effects only track. And it makes it a lot easier to manage there. If you're using Logic Pro or Pro Tools or Ableton or something that actually has sends and receives and buses, well then clearly you can just set up multiple different reverb or delay buses and then send different amounts of things to different amounts. So if you wanted to have a reverb that's like reverb with a high cut or a low cut, high pass filter, so that it's only adding reverb to the top end, and then some of your instruments may want to go there. You may want to have a reverb that does or a delay that does a ping pong with a stereo ping pong delay to the left to the right so that you can add that to your vocals. Then you can set that up separately again. So yeah, your effects don't have to mirror. They don't just have to be sitting there on top of your original instrument or your original vocal track and just be following in a linear way. You can vary that up and you can mix and match by doing things like having separate vocal tracks, separate tracks for your effects if you're in something like GarageBand, or using sends, receives, and aux buses. Here's a left field idea, and I used to say this back before it was popular. Yeah, I was doing this before it was cool. But start with the chorus. And by that, I basically just mean change your arrangement around. If you're always a intro, verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus person, go chorus, verse, double verse, then double chorus. Like, just change things up. Look at your arrangement and go, how can I do this a bit differently? So listen to like the Beatles were pretty good at this, right? So they had some songs that were very traditional in their pattern, and then they had a song like Good Day Sunshine that just starts and then it goes into the verse, and then it goes into that. And that actually, like, that song has a key change in the middle there. It has everything. It has a lot of the things that we've been talking about already here in this one. But yeah, don't be afraid to try a different format, because you won't know until you try. Now, I say that I was doing this or talking about this before. We're seeing more of this now because we've got this whole short listener attention span, 30-second stream, TikTok, Spotify brain syndrome going on now. People seem to think, and they're probably right, that if you don't hook the listener in the first 30 seconds, they're not going to stick around and listen to the rest of the song. So a lot of times now, you're at least reaching the chorus or the hook or something within that first 30 seconds. And a lot of songs are actually starting with the chorus. They're just diving straight on in there. Some songs you could argue are just end-to-end chorus. They're just the hook and the chorus. You know the sort of songs, right? The ones that are one chord or two chords if you're lucky, and they just go through the whole way like that. Yeah. So you start with the chorus, try something different, be adventurous and be experimental. Add that spice. Spice is the variety. No, variety is the spice of life, and spice is the variety of music. There you go. That could all go on a t-shirt. Number 9. Oohs and ahs. Yes, oohs and ahs are underrated when it comes to music. So when you're thinking of your backing vocal, the classic backing vocal is you do a third or a fifth, or sometimes a fourth or sixth or seventh if you get super wacky. So you just go like, ah, la, 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 la. And meanwhile, the backing vocal is going, la, 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 la. But when you're singing something, think about, could you use, and this is kind of using same things, maybe you want to use your backing vocals as a pad or even as an arpeggio. So you could just have like a song where you just like, and then I saw the whale on the beach. Very depressing song. And instead of being like, and then I saw the whale on the beach, instead of having just that, you could be like, ah. Or it could be doing something. You could be doing both. You could be harmonizing, but doing oohs and ahs. Ah. Or you could just be doing a pad. Ah, I saw the whale on the beach. Yeah. Or you could be doing like an arpeggio. Ah. You know who were the kings of this? Queen. I know. I didn't mean to say it like that either, but it worked out perfectly. The kings of the arpeggiated backing oohs and ahs harmony vocals were Queen. Listen to a Queen song. They actually do a thing where they've got like 3 voices and they play out a chord. So it go ba 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 ba. It's a really cool technique. So if you've got like 4 vocal tracks, instead of trying to go la 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 la, you just go la la, and then meanwhile it's going la 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 la, and they can all be holding their oohs and their ahs. Yes, I said holding your ass, and it can sound really, really cool. So play with your oohs and play with your ahs. Number 10, fade in and fade out. This used to be the standard. Remember the old days where your songs would almost always fade out and quite a few of them would fade in? Think of your 60s rock and pop songs. They would. They would have a nice fade up and then they would fade out again. Now, modern songs don't really do this. A lot of them build up. Think about something like Bad Guy by Billie Eilish with that. That really builds up, doesn't it? And it actually fades out at the end, depending which mix you're listening to, because there's about 100 different mixes of that song. So builds and fades, like, yes, there's something to be said for the Metallica and the Foo Fighters ways of hit you in the face, just keep pummeling you until you get the big final, and then you're done. Had to sneeze. How was my edit? Or you can actually have a little bit more variety and you can have some fun and play with it. And the good thing is, it kind of forces you to include a little bit more dynamics. So you have to add a little bit more in the way of loud and soft, because if you're fading in and fading out, you can't just be at that full ear pain volume the whole way through. So fade ins and fade outs, like, let's bring them back. Like the word rad, which we're bringing back. You know, I've got this rad background now. If you're watching the video version, we're bringing back rad. I would also love to bring out the fade ins. Bring them back. Bring back the fade in, the fade out. So let's reiterate, shall we? What are 10 things that you may want to go and try? Number 1, you may want to try some more doubles and triples and quadruples of your vocals. Even if you're using it a bit now, maybe just go nuts with it. Just play with it and try it. Just record a bunch of them and see how thick you can make that vocal sound. Try the octave up and the octave down, the other way to do it. Check that you're putting bridges and middle eights in. Are you varying it up, or are you just going verse, chorus, verse, chorus? Maybe try something different. Key changes. Change it up, baby. Do that 80s style. Let's just change it and put a tone up at the end. Why not? Pads. Don't underestimate the power of the pad. Arpeggios. Don't underestimate the power of arpeggios. Panning your effects and adding some difference to your effects. Remember, your effects don't have to be linear. You don't just have to throw an effect on a track and leave it as is. You can vary it, change it, improve it, put it into a bus, and then remove some of the EQ or change it up or pan it, whatever you want to do. Start with the chorus. Give it a go. Like, change up your arrangements, your oohs and your ahs. Yeah, play with your oohs and your ahs, people. Fade in and fade out. Give it a crack. Why not? So there you go. There's 10 ideas. If you're finding you're in a bit of a rut, you're finding your songs are all sounding the same and you need to add a little bit of spice and a little bit of flavor, then go ahead and try these 10 tips. What tips do you have? I would love to hear them. If you're watching this on the video version, please jump down into the comments section below and let us know. What did you do? Was there anything that you've done recently where you're like, I was just doing this and plodding along, and then I realized that I'd never tried doing X. And as soon as I added X to my repertoire, my songs have been great and I've never looked back. I'd love to hear what X is. Let's call it Y. Let's not talk about X. We don't talk about X. Oh, no, no. That is going to do it for this week's podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Once again, if you'd like to check out all the ways you can keep in touch and support me here on the channel, head over to studiolivetoday.com. If you're in the market for any gear to do all the cool things we just talked about, studiolivetoday.com/gear. That's the gear guide. They are affiliate links over there. If you make a purchase, they will break off a chunk and send it my way. And as always, folks, I would love for you to be kind to yourselves, be kind to others, and keep creating. I'll see you next time right here on the Studio Live Today podcast.